Hi guys, today we're discussing OWASP's top 10. This is Lexon Consulting, managed services provider, managed services security provider, also a staffing agency provider. All right, so OWASP is why is OWASP critical? OWASP kind of uh, creates the framework for um, essentially application security. Um, and OWASP stands for Open Web Application Security Project. So they kind of set the standards for best practices for building applications for web applications, and it's one of the most critical ones, and is followed by most companies. So let's go ahead and proceed. There's 10 of them. The older version of OWASP's top 10 is from 2017. Is talks about injection, broken authentication, sensitive data exposure, XML, external entities, broken access control, security misconfiguration, secure cross-site scripting, and secure deserialization. Those are the top 10s from 2017. But in 2021, things have changed a little bit. For the longest time, we've been following, WhatsApp has been following that model. But since then, in 2021, things have changed. A couple new ones and old ones that have been renamed to something slightly different. So we'll go through all the 10 and kind of discuss from there. So broken access control, cryptographic failures, injections, insecure design, security misconfiguration, vulnerable and outdated data, uh, identification, authentication failures, software and data integrity failures, security login monitoring failures, server-side request forgery. Most of them are self-explanatory, but I'll try to give examples, and I'll also give examples of how to prevent them. So let's start with broken access. What is broken access control? Of course, broken access control is basically this happens when there's a violation of privilege. So, say for instance, a user who's supposed to have basically um, user level access is now having admin access. So that's an example of broken access. Hackers can do that. They can intercept your authentication and as an admin and pretend to be the admin, and as a result cause a compromise. So um, exactly, an example could be um, a user who's not logged in uh, acting as an admin and using admin um, privileges based off of stolen credentials or intercepted credentials. So that's a good example of broken access. You have a lot of APIs that, if you have an application, you have APIs that make calls to your database, make calls to your application. Especially with AWS, you have your access keys that are saved into your system and into your application, and these access keys are authenticating in the background. And if somebody intercepts those, can actually have the same access that these applications are supposed to have and use it for nefarious purposes. Um, so, how to prevent some of this? Obviously, uh, deny everything by default. Um, as you do your policy writing, you learn about implicit denies. So deny everything except the services that you need or the access that you need. So if John Doe needs access to this, the only thing he's going to have access to is those resources. Everything else is denied. That's the motto. Um, so of course, you want to make sure that these broken, any kind of login authentication is being logged, and any failures are being logged. That's another way to prevent that. And then of course, uh, implementing access control mechanisms that reuse, uh, that you reuse throughout the application. So Um, so making sure that no one service or no one application is having multiple accesses. So that's broken access control. So in a nutshell, make sure that you're protecting your privileges so that they might not be intercepted and used for nefarious reasons. Uh, and more importantly, denying everything by default and only allowing certain resources access to certain elevated information, and obviously logging those activities, logging when somebody fails. Next one is cryptographic failures. Um, Cryptographic failures, this happens whenever there's weak cryptographic algorithms, like say for instance 3DES, that's pretty much gone, no longer use TLS version 1, that's insecure. So you have to go to either 256 AES, you have to use TLS 1.3, and those are the kind of protocols that encrypt your data, make sure that they are of a higher level, and this way, it there's the chance of those encryptions being broken are much lower. Um, and the way you prevent that, obviously, make sure that all data is encrypted at rest. Don't transmit data without any encryption. Like somebody can eavesdrop on that data, and if it's not encrypted, they'll easily read that information. Do not use legacy protocols, uh, such as FTP or SMTP for transporting sensitive data. You have SFTP, which is more secure, and obviously always used authenticated encryption instead of just encryption. So track your encryption keys. Make sure only select people have access to those encryption keys. AWS has a pretty good option in which they have um, KMS system that keeps track of the encryption keys used in AWS, and they are cycled regularly. So that's one example. Um, an example of an injection. The third one, obviously, is injection. And this one is, you're familiar with SQL cross-site scripting, SQL injections, where somebody enters bogus information on your SQL um, SQL application that's connected to the SQL database, and by entering bogus data, your SQL thinks it's the correct password and authenticates them. So basically, a user can supply data that's not validated, filtered, or sanitized, and if your application does not have the correct checks, it could assume that that is a user that is authenticating with the correct information, which is clearly not. How do you prevent that? Obviously, you have validation checks, limit SQL controls and queries that could cause, say, for instance, a SQL database to misconstrue what's been entered. Um, so have server-side input validation. Also, have limitations of what SQL controls can be injected from the front page. Um, another The fourth one is obviously insecure design. Insecure design is just that you design when you're building an application. Sometimes there's a rush to get to the final product, and as a result, you don't have security integrated into the process. And as a result, when you present the final product, um, there's a lot of security and threats that were not considered. So when you're going through your secure development lifecycle, make sure that you are testing the security and the design of your application. So you prevent this by establishing secure development lifecycle. Ensure that you are evaluating the design and security of each piece. Uh, the other things that you can do is segregate um, uh, the different functions of the application, so that no one application has too much access And this way, if one gets compromised, the others don't ultimately get compromised. So you segregate the access. And obviously limit resource consumption by user or service. That also is a perfect example. Um, then the fifth one is security misconfiguration, as the name is, as the name implies. When you're building an application and you're rushing to market, there's chances you might have insecure configurations in there. Or a misconfiguration, mistake, a natural mistake. We're humans, and that could be a bug which is later discovered. And we've had this happen several times. You had the SolarWinds bust that SolarWinds, somebody injected a misconfiguration in their deployment, in their version release. Clients downloaded that, and because SolarWinds didn't do its part to securely check this information and check the releases, make sure they were not uh, prone with errors, they released a product which ended up being used for nefarious purposes by hackers. So that's security misconfiguration. As you can tell, you just need to have checks and balances. Make sure things are checked before they go to market. Make sure that things are tested, verified, and that you have penetration tests done on your systems to ensure that there's no vulnerabilities discovered before going to market. And obviously, look, when building applications, you're constantly using uh, plugins and APIs and configurations from mostly um, built by maybe open source platforms like WordPress. So you have to do your due diligence and do software composition analysis. Um, the number six is vulnerable and outdated components. This one is easy, obviously. As we all know, you want to constantly patch your systems for new releases. Whenever you have 0 day vulnerabilities, or whenever you have any vulnerabilities on your system, make sure it goes through the configuration management and you patch your systems so that they're not vulnerable, because the longer they're out there and they're public facing and they have vulnerable settings or vulnerable software running on them, chances are higher. So patch your systems, your Windows updates, Linux updates, your Apache updates, and so on and so forth. Number seven is identification and authentication failures. Usually, these keeping track of this is critical because it's an indication. If you look at the logs and you're seeing a lot of people attempting to get to your application, then you want to make sure that those activities are being logged, because they're a side indication of how many people can see your equipment facing the internet, how many people are trying to get in. So if you're getting over 10,000 attempts, I mean, that should raise a flag and say, okay, what do we do uh, to prevent this? So obviously, to prevent it, you want to make sure that there's a password policy that ensures a certain number of pass characters, alphanumeric. It expires after every certain number of days. Make sure that you're not using default admin accounts. Make sure that you're increasing the delay of failed login attempts. So if somebody has 3 attempts, lock them out. Don't let them just continue attempting, um, um, scot free with no repercussions. So that's identification and authentication failures. Number eight is software and data security failures. So this comes back to software composition analysis, very similar um, to vulnerable and outdated components. So make sure that your libraries that you're using for your programming are being vetted and that they're being checked constantly. As part of the continuous integration and continuous development pipeline, make sure that the configuration, access control, all that process, there's integrity is maintained. In security, you have the CIA, which is confidential, integrity, and availability. So you want to maintain those through that whole process of developing. So ensure that there's digital signatures or mechanisms to verify the software, um, especially if you're using open source. Number 9 is security logging and monitoring. This is obviously critical. If you're not logging what is happening on your systems, chances are you won't have a way to trace or know if a compromise or breach has happened. So ensure that the events are logged, failed logins, high value transactions are logged. Make sure that if an API is making a call to a certain application, that those are all logged and reviewed by your security team. Make sure that there's nothing anomalous happening. So obviously, the way you can do this, how to prevent security logging and monitoring failures, just ensure all login, access control, and server-side validation failures are logged with sufficient user context so you can identify the suspicious ones. Then obviously you want to make sure that your log data is encrypted and protected, that it cannot be changed by someone and that ends up giving false information. Um, and obviously having a good incident response and recovery plan in the event something goes wrong. Last but not least is the server side request, which is uh, a server side request forgery. Somebody can request, you're trying to access an internet and somebody points you to a different web address that is um, nefarious, and as a result, you end up getting supplying your passwords and username to somebody because you are using the wrong URL. So, from how you can prevent this, a couple ways. From a network layer, you're going to ensure you segment access from the remote. Or you can enforce an implicit deny rule and only allow certain traffic to ensure that if there's a request coming in on port 80, that's the only thing that's allowed. The request is coming in on port 443, those are the only requests that are allowed through your firewall. Obviously sanitize your data, sanitize your incoming packets, ensure that they're accurate. But yeah, those are the 10 OWASP top 10 um, security things you have to worry about when you have an application running. Hope it was helpful, and enjoy your day and happy learning.